Welcome to Democrats Abroad, Spain. I'm going to give a very quick overview of your amazing track record as an election expert and much international affairs and so on. Just taken straight from your Wikipedia entry. So if any of it is sort of wrong or out of date, please set me right. And the brief summary is that Rachel graduated from the University of Oregon. She then attended the University of Georgia, where she has a degree in political science and international affairs. Your analysis, Rachel's analysis, has been on many media platforms around the US, but particularly MSNBC and New York Times. In 2017, you wrote a very important book called The Unprecedented 2016 Presidential Election, which was all about Trump, aka the former guy, but in many quarters these days. Today, you run a podcast, I believe, called the Election Whisperer, which is hosted on Substack, and you also run a liberal super PAC called StrikePAC. You have been recognized, amongst many things, for predicting the size of the blue wave in 2018 midterm elections. And then over a year out, you predicted that Trump would indeed become the former guy in 2020. Now, we're very interested in hearing from you, Rachel, today, because of course, there's a narrative going on in the US media, which is sort of trying to portray that Joe Biden is going to sail to sort of a big difficulty in the midterms this time. Personally, I feel that given the meal he's had placed in front of him, he's actually doing as good a job as anyone could be doing. But I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say about the future. So without further ado, Rachel Bitecofer, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I should point out, like, my super PAC is small L liberal super PAC, is liberal, definitely, but it's also really focused on democracy. So right now there's two parties, and one of them is pro-democracy and the other one is not. And so therefore, it's pretty clear who we're working against. I'm really excited to be here today. When I first was approached about Democrats abroad, of course, I made a joke that soon we might all be Democrats abroad. But I also Googled and realized, wow, what a potential pool of votes sitting there at a time period where I would assume, and this is what the information gathering that I'm hoping to accomplish from the audience, from you guys, where people who are not here, domestic, are probably pretty concerned for those of us that are, and their extended families, friends, relatives, or what have you. We're going through a very turbulent time here in the US, and we'll talk a little bit about the realities of that and how extensive the situation really is, because it's not really covered in the US media anyway. And in terms of the vote potential in 22, what I really want, I'm going to start off depressing you guys. So let me pump you up for a second. I'm going to depress you, but I'm also hoping to empower you, because you're an incredibly important asset and could be instrumental in holding, especially some of these competitive swing state and Senate and governor races and the House races. So I am really come back a little bit and circle around back to your organization and what the call to action I'm going to lay at your feet. Because first I'm going to depress you, and I'm going to tell you the absolute truth. As Chris was reading from my history as a political analyst, as an election forecaster, a political scientist, what I am concerned with is explaining elections structurally, fundamentally, right? And though I looked like a really big genius in 2018, when I told Nate Silver, oh, no, it's going to be like 40 seats in the House, dude. It's not even a question of whether they can flip it. That's a given the conditions of the districts that, you know, take you to a House majority, which at that time was 23 seats. It's going to also spread through all of these other places with de-aligning, realigning demographics. And, you know, it seemed really present, but actually in political science world, the midterm cycle, the midterm effect is one of the most stable, strongest patterns in political science. And what that refers to is the tendency for the president's party to lose seats in the midterm election that happens 2 years in the middle of the presidential 4-year term. So that's why they call it midterm. And this for, you know, really talking about the last 40 years, it's only been disrupted twice. We'll talk about those disruptions in a minute. So it's really a standard, you know, pattern that's predictable. Where I innovated was I started to point out that midterm results are a product of some of that persuasion pool, moving its vote choice between one cycle to the other in terms of voting for one party for the presidency and then maybe flipping over and voting to the other party on a congressional ballot 2 years later. There are people who do that, and they are important. But equally important is the surge and decline turnout problem that is a major factor or feature of the midterm effect, one of these mechanisms that drive it. And that is a tendency for the party that's in power, their electorate is happy. It's, you know, happy people don't vote. When you're in power, your Supreme Court justices are getting confirmed normally, and you're getting some policy, even if you're not getting everything you want. But most important of all is you don't feel the threat. You don't, only people who really pay attention to politics, like everyone in this chat, really appreciates the importance of Congress in our separation of power system and understands the limitations of the presidency enough to understand how critical control of Congress is. And when a party is in power, generally over the last 20, 30 years, their voters have in effect taken their foot off the gas. They are usually seeing strong turnout declines, not just among what we would consider base Democrats, but also that critical part of their independent coalition. So independent leaners who lean left are going to vote for Democrats almost all of the time, just like right-leaning independents will vote for Republicans all the time. And that's why we call these two types of people closet partisans. But if they don't show up to vote, then they don't vote for anybody, right? And so we see the surge and decline pretty heavy in that independent pool as well. And again, it's powered by this concept that I certainly did not invent, but popularized, I think, a little bit, which is negative partisanship. And this idea that people are motivated from fear, threat, and anger at the opposition party, okay? And that's always been the case. I mean, any political system is contentious, and you're going to see stuff like that. But in American politics, we're sitting here 20, 30 years down what is effectively a polarization rabbit hole. It is not a place that we found ourselves in by accident. It's a product of the system that rose up around us, especially once the digital revolution happened and the internet emerged, but not just exclusively to that, because a lot of it comes from the conservative movement's effort to consolidate an information space that they controlled, which they have now perfected, and other institutional advantages, strategic initiatives that were long-term plans for them, have pushed American voters into a more ideological, what we would call hyper-partisan. So you're partisan, but you're so hyper-partisan that you hate the other side, kind of atmosphere that we're in. And we think about the 2018 midterms. One of the reasons I knew in 2017 in Virginia, which is where my modeling first deployed, and then 2018, was that the languished turnout of the coalition for Clinton was not going to be a factor in 2018. That Trump's election was such a shock to the system that many of the people who chose to sit out 2016, and there were considerable amounts out of our coalition, and some who chose to vote third party in that cycle, those were decisive elements to how Trump won, despite not cracking 50% in any of the critical swing states. I mean, keep in mind, he was a plurality vote winner in those swing states because so much vote went to third party candidates. So in 18, the fundamentals had shifted. Negative partisanship was powering the Women's March and all of the other things that split up from that. And, you know, I knew that what we would be looking at in terms of the electorate in 2017 in Virginia, 2018, was going to be one that was much more college educated, much more female, much more diverse, and much more young than what we would traditionally have seen in a midterm, certainly not in the 2010 and 2014 midterms when we were, like we are now, party in power. And, you know, in 2020, like, here's the interesting thing about that is that I predicted the outcome of that election well before COVID hit. COVID should have changed the dynamics and made them, frankly, much worse for Donald Trump. So just to put this into perspective, in 1980, when Reagan ran, and it was a pretty unique time, we had a couple crises, inflation crisis coming out of the oil crisis, and of course the Iran stuff, right? But at the end of the day, like, you know, what Reagan's like an Obama character. If we don't like Reagan, we should be able to recognize his charisma and effective orientation skills. But Reagan was one of those people that other, you know, Democrats were attracted to. And when he ran those two cycles, he won everything but 1 or 2 states, depending on the cycle. So that means he won over a ton of blue voters in, you know, even the bluest states, right, to win that kind of electoral college landslide. And the reason he was able to do that is at that time period in American politics, I didn't know your party just on your ideology. If you told me I'm a conservative, then I would have to ask, are you a Democrat or a Republican? And now, as you well know, I mean, that's mostly sorted. Liberals are Democrats, conservatives are Republicans. You know, abortion was very similar to that. Just because somebody was pro-abortion, or anti-abortion, could not tell you the party that they would belong in. I mean, it was a clue. Certainly, it's always been a powerful clue, but it wasn't decisive like it is now. So we think about what happened in COVID, and I really like to point this out because you guys are an international audience. We got to see data that polled the world. You know, how is Macron? How is Johnson and other foreign leaders responding? And this includes the Japanese prime minister. And in every country, you can see when COVID comes in, whether the leader responded well and is rewarded through that by increased support in the public, or if the leader did poorly, like the Japanese prime minister did, their public opinion dipped down, right? People were responding to Macron and to Prime Minister of Japan, whose name is not coming to me right now, handling, right? In the US, though, you actually see a flat line. There's no response at all to public opinion. And that is pretty freaking extraordinary, guys. Like, I cannot possibly stress enough how extraordinary that is. You have a once-in-a-lifetime cataclysmic pandemic that is being grossly mismanaged, okay? Publicly grossly mismanaged, and there's no public opinion response at all. And what that is it is a sickness that has now pervades the entire electorate that disallows Republicans from acknowledging Trump is screwing this up, right? So, like, even if they personally feel like that, they will not tell the survey researcher that, right? And you know, it was both something I predicted. I had said I'm putting out this update for my forecast, which initially deployed the year before. As this COVID crisis is hitting, and it looks like it's going to be an extraordinary event, but guys, don't count on it changing any of the dynamics of this race, because that's how sick we are in America with polarization and hyperpartisanship. And darn if that's not exactly what happened. I mean, really never see Trump see this COVID effect at all. We see pretty stable opinion. And in terms of Biden's performance, if you want to judge it, don't poll American voters because right now all you're getting is a reflection of the partisan distribution of the electorate. Right-leaning independents and Republicans are going to disapprove, and Biden can single-handedly go to Moscow wrestle Putin and a bear, kick both their asses, and it still wouldn't matter, right? Republicans are not going to give this guy a bone in this environment, and they really are not able to in terms of rank and file voter class because the permission structure is not there from party elites and public opinion, influencers like Tucker Carlson. Like, you have the permission to respond and rally around the flag from the party. So, in terms of what we're looking at now, and I ran through that because I desperately need you guys to believe me. And I'm so glad Chris mentioned Churchill. Maybe before some of you got on, he just mentioned Churchill, and I mentioned I'm a huge fan. And one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of Churchill is that he told it like it was, right? I mean, he stood there and he's like, I've got nothing to offer you but blood, toil, blood and sweat or whatever, right? That's basically what I have to offer you guys. You're sitting in various locales around the world, looking in at domestic politics from abroad. And what we know for sure today is happening is the Republican Party has divested itself from a commitment to liberal, small L, liberal democracy, to republicanism, small R republicanism, and to the rule of law, which is probably the worst of all of the three things, right? Because without that, you can end up in a mess really quick. Even with all of that, they lead and have led for months now on something called the generic ballot. And what that is when somebody is called and they ask voters, hey, if you think about this fall, do you want Republicans or Democrats to control Congress? Right now, the Republican Party has had and continues to have a pretty stagnant 3-4 point advantage on that. To put that into perspective, Democrats led that all through 2018 at 9 points. Okay, and we kind of have to be at 9 points because of the geography of our votes and gerrymandering. So at the very least, what we need is the generic ballot to invert and Democrats to be a couple points ahead in it. And then in addition to that, the other metric that matters is something called enthusiasm. And so when we ask people, how enthusiastic are you to vote in the fall? And then we break that down between right-leaning independents and Republicans and left-leaning independents and Democrats. And you can even just do the party. You can see this huge gap, 10 points, 15 points. Republicans are like, I am just delighted to vote. Right? And that was us in 2018. Now it's them. And I'm really sad to say, but I'm not surprised at all, that all of the headlines from the international stuff have done nothing to mitigate that, even though it flipped the news coverage from the sausage making debacles of the Democratic coalition, because they kept insisting on these omnibus bills instead of wedging them out into individual bills like the GOP would do, and making Republicans vote against $35 insulin. They wanted these big omnibus packages through, so they kept fighting for it. I had hoped maybe after a month and a half of nothing but really international headlines that we would see some stabilization there, but it really hasn't moved anything. And unless those numbers move, then we can predict with pretty good specificity what to expect in November, considering today is March. It's not, it's not a close election. It's many months off, but we know as of today, if the election was held today, this is what we could expect to see. A loss of 30 seats in the House for Democrats. With that, 3, maybe more Senate races. And if you lose 30 seats in the House of Representatives, then you are doing so poorly electorally that you will probably be losing control of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin governorships in that same cycle, which is kind of bad. Because it's hard to imagine a new, freshly minted Republican governor of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, standing up for democracy against the big lie and the coup plot. So really having the control of those, to me, is like a necessary but not sufficient condition for a free and fair election in 2024. And so there's the stakes, right? We know today that the models show a seat loss of 25, 30 seats, that kind of wave. By the way, in 2010, the model showed about that at this point, and they ended up with 63 seats, right? So it could get worse, not better, in other words. What we want to be doing is trying to check some boxes to see what we can do to mitigate that. I, of course, am arguing strategically, and we're not going to get sidetracked into too much of this messaging stuff that I do. But my argument is the way to survive a midterm effect is to attack it at its mechanisms, this preference for change amongst conversion voters and this lack of fear in the base, right? And the juicing both of those things, a conversion pool with brand disqualification work, so advertising that's focused 100% on the Republican Party and making people fear for their health, wealth, and safety under Republican rule, illustrating the future so you can disqualify change. And then, of course, through that messaging, you are reminding the Democratic base, why they don't have nice things. And it's not because of Manchin and Sinema, right? It's because the Republican Party won't give us nice things, and they're never going to unless we bowl them over electorally. Also reminding that base what will happen in a world controlled by this version of the Republican Party, and not just happening to us. So the people in this room, loyal Democrats, I'm sure, many liberals, some progressives, if there's a distinction in your mind on that, care about the collective good. We care about others, we care about outgroups, and that makes us pretty psychologically unique. Most voters are very self-centered and me-centered, and that's why the Republican Party speaks to voters at a personal and emotive level, and rather than like a greater good policy wonky number approach. And I mention all of that because I see the Democrats abroad as kind of like strategically like a secret surprise attack, right? Here's all these people, and you guys are to me like 100 thick in this room. If you're in this room, then you are extraordinary. And I don't mean that in like a cheeky way. I mean, you guys are really like the best of the best. You're here, you're committed, you want to know what's going on, you're involved, and therefore I want to enlist each and every one of you in what would be a pretty epic undertaking, because I was looking through the data for the abroad voting, and the acronym, which I'll never remember without reading it off, is UOCAVA. It's probably got a pronunciation. How do you say it? Someone?
UOCAVA.
UOCAVA?
UOCAVA. Just like it
sounds like the shot I add to my Starbucks drink. Yeah, I think it's avocado. All right. So here's something, guys. Okay, number one, I'm pretty proud of you all of abroad voters, not just Democrats, but abroad voters for outperforming military voters in 2020 in terms of majority of the pool. So that's not for nothing. And it suggests to me that there's some infrastructure for us to grow on. And number two, though, here's an interesting fact in that little report that was handily sent to me. I think Andy sent it. 40% of all ballots returned in that system from 3 states: California, Florida, and Washington. Okay, 3 states. So that's almost half of all the ballots that came from abroad come back from something that's happening in California, Florida, and Washington that isn't happening in these other states, okay? And so to me, what that suggests is, number one, if there's somebody who's involved in these 3 states and their ballot return or outreach efforts, certainly when I'm done talking, we'll want to be pretty high up in that question pool. But number two, like what is it that they're doing, what kind of infrastructure they have that you might be able to deploy and copy quickly that is allowing them to achieve this? Because I mean, it's to have 3 out of 50, so that means 47 states are not in that top 3. It's pretty extraordinary, and the gap actually in that top 5 or top 6 down is pretty sharp drop off. So to me, when we think about Democrats abroad, there's a couple of things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about you physically sitting in Italy, in Spain, in New Zealand, wherever you might be, and your commitment to requesting this ballot, because unfortunately you guys have an opt-in system, and that's our first strategic hurdle. It's a huge institutional hurdle to overcome. So like in your efforts for this for 22, like I don't know what the deadlines are, but I'm assuming we're going to get there quick, right? You guys, in my opinion, should create some kind of effort to increase the request pool, okay? Because that's task one, request pool increase. And then, we have to get those returned. But how could you go about expanding this request pool? My guess is that you know other people who don't have the level of commitment to come to a Zoom like this, but are deeply concerned about Americans' condition. And, if not, you might want to remind them that if America falls into fascism with the world's most aggressive, largest military, there will be nowhere to hide for anybody. So, just because you're not there doesn't mean it doesn't matter, right? To me, all of the people in their various countries have networks, and they have peer-to-peer networks within them of expats that they could tap and try to convince, if they're not Democrats, if they're independents, if they're apolitical, to request one of these ballots in the hopes of returning it to, for the fall, for the count. So that we call that peer-to-peer field work, and it's incredibly effective. It's actually way more effective than any type of voter contact that we've tested up to date. The act of Mary, who I just happened to see because she's below me in the Zoom chat, the act of Mary calling, her quilting circle, she knows a few of them are of the same mind, but they're not particularly political, and putting some pressure on them to engage in this cycle for the stakes and the reasons that we've just discussed would be immensely helpful. Especially because within that effort, you're almost certain to identify somebody else who's willing to go and approach their friends and their networks, right? And when you think about that, that's how you can take one person and very quickly exponent their influence, right? But I'm also interested in imploring or inspiring some of you guys to band together to make that peer-to-peer flip back to the United States, because I'm certain everybody here has left friends, family, relatives that they could contact and also push to vote, right? So to me, it's like a double dip, because you guys are in this unique environment that allows access and networking to happen in a way that certainly no way stateside could do. But also, many of you hail from states and congressional districts, and I'm particularly interested in that, like how of these 6 million people, how many of them are in swing places, right? And we could, through that backwards peer-to-peer on the domestic side, also have a strong influence on getting the turnout rate for Democrats abroad up from 20. It's about 20%. It's a little bit less than, I think it's like 17 or something like that, wasn't it? What was it, Amy? Do you want to chime in? Anyone know?
It's way less than 20. It's less than 10.
I thought for 2020, it almost got to 20 though, didn't it?
No, it's less than 10%.
Ah, geez. Okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to revise my goal. Because to go from 10 to 50 seems ambitious. And I don't like to make bullshit goals. I like to do things that are achievable, right? But we got to double it at least, right? We've got to, or American democracy will collapse, right? It's the same message, and I'm such a pill that nobody asked me out to dinner twice right now. It's the same message I'm taking to wealthy donors, to party figures, to electeds, to activist groups, to state party chairs, is to try to really get people to appreciate that the danger that we were in 2020 is actually much more profound now than it was then. It's just as profound, you could argue, because what they intend to do once they take control of Congress is use that control to end all the investigations, open investigations for political reasons against Democrats, and come probably pretty aggressively after some of your favorite Democrats serving in Congress, and that the goal ultimately is to fiddle around the state level on these election rolls and squeeze out. If they can take these 3, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, they can take those gubernatorial elections, then they have a real advantage. I mean, not like a real advantage, a Democratic advantage, but like a cheating advantage for 2024. And if that is to happen, I mean, if we think about the coup plan that happened last time, it did fail, right? I mean, luckily there were a few people in these critical places in the Michigan Board of Elections Kemp and Raffensperger down in Georgia, who have now been corrected. That those people have all been moved out. There is no institutional like safeguard left, and that's been a very intentional purge by the GOP, taking and changing the conditions that thwarted their power grab in January. Because make no mistake about it, if there had not been a certification of the election or a peaceful transfer of power, then at that moment there is no more democracy. And I have a lot of people ask me, well, what do you think would have happened if, you know, if Trump wouldn't have left? I'm like, then you live in a dictatorship. It's not democracy anymore at that moment. So because of that, I am asking each person to find that that Churchill inside, just an indefatigable, even though we're all tired, indefatigable, that's a very hard word to say, spirit of urgency, because we are in a fierce moment of urgency here, and it's an all hands on deck moment. I wish that we had a party structure that had sat down with you guys 1 year ago, which I would have certainly done if I was in charge of the, there's nobody in charge of the Democratic Party, but if I was, I would have definitely looked at this resource and started to put in some structural and resource, like monetary resource, to get that 10% up. Here we know we have 6 million, let's say 3 million reliable Democrats just sitting there. And they're so political that they took the time to identify themselves, right? So like clearly just a little bit of organization and effort could go a long way. And unfortunately, because I'm overextended, it's not something I can spearhead, though I certainly am happy to advise and help along with. But I'm hoping I can inspire at least one of you today in this meeting to kind of take the banner and say, you know what, this is not easy to do, but we definitely need to get some effort in place to maximize this a broad vote in 2022. So that's kind of my preamble, and I don't want to take all the question and answer time. So I'm going to trail off and let you guys turn it back over to Chris.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very good start and a good overview of how you see things at the moment. There's gradually been a few questions coming in. So what I'm going to do is just start reeling through those, and you know, please answer as you see fit. So just scrolling back.
I think Brett Spector had the first one.
Yeah, Brett Spector. Brett, please fire away.
Sorry, did you want me to read that out, or?
Or, well, please ask your question.
Okay. Rachel, nice to see you. I've been following you for a long time. I'm a forecaster for Good Judgment, so been reading your stuff for a long time. My question was about your theory on negative enthusiasm. And from the polling that you're seeing now, what is it that's going to get the Democrats out to the polls? I mean, there's some very general issues, and we're, as you said, we're all quite involved. But for your average person that's sitting there, what is really going to motivate them to go, oh, I've got to vote, otherwise these terrible things are going to happen?
Yeah, and the point I would reiterate, I mean, it's unfortunate because I can only influence so much of the message, right? I wish the whole party was running the message I'm going to suggest to you, because I feel like that is the best option. So if your problem is, and here's something else to understand about the Republican Party, their system is designed completely around what I'm going to talk about here, which is making the base uncomfortable and fear for themselves, right? So like what we're going to see in 2022, and we've seen it already now in 21 in Virginia, is a 10-year like culmination of their system where they have literally been perfecting coalitional turnout. And they hit presidential precinct numbers, almost hit them anyway, in Virginia, in the districts or the precincts that Trump had won most resoundingly. They were able to replicate that turnout, right? So they have enthusiasm, they have this negative partisanship thing, and they have much better system that's designed for a hyperpolarized electorate. And in our case, we are not inclined to make people fearful in advertising. And what we need to be doing and what you should do in your personal peer-to-peer efforts, especially, is to make people fear for their loved ones that are in the US, like for them, right? It can't be necessarily, people like us, again, are very sensitive to, hey, we need to help Ukraine, right? But, you know, most people are very self-focused and will respond best if they feel a personal stake or a personal threat. So what I would suggest is, if you're trying to create negative partisanship, you not only want to apprise people of the direct threat to them personally, a me frame, not a we frame, but you also want to make it clear where the threat is coming from, okay? It can't be corporations and big oil and hope that people get this inference. It needs to be the Republican Party, not some Republicans, unless you're talking about Ukraine, not, you know, conservatives, okay? It needs to, the message always needs to reiterate, you're under threat, health, wealth, and safety threat, and the person or the people that are coming for you are the Republican Party writ large, right? Because we're trying to do to them what they've done to us, which is define us along the most ideologically rigid component parts of our coalition, and then set that frame as that this is what the party looks like. Whereas the Republican Party has truly been captured by its radical coalition. The establishment is now the minority, and that's why Mitch McConnell behaves in the way that he does, and Lindsey Graham and all these people who changed their behavior over the last 5 years. The Republican establishment lost its power after 2016 and has not ever recaptured it. And yet we tend to want to be very nuanced. So did this member vote against election certification? Then we can run an ad about that. But oh, if this guy didn't, then we can't you know, brand him as a favoring insurrection. Well, the fact of the matter is there's two Republicans in the Republican coalition right now that are pro-democracy, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. End, period, full stop. And you don't have to say, you know, Republicans, except for Kinzinger and Cheney, are, you know, you just say all Republicans. And it's an unfortunate hyperbolic trick that I'm trying to get people to understand is a necessity in the time that we're living in, because this is a moment in the history that people will be reading about. And the other party has declared war, not only on us, but on democracy itself. And we have to meet the moment effectively. And there's just no other way to motivate these coalitional marginals who feel better. They felt better as soon as Joe Biden was sworn into office. We must now clue them into the threats that they face.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Thank you. Amy Porter, you have a question.
I do. Hi, Rachel. It's great to see you. Just a quick comment before I ask my question. We always talk about the importance of down ballot voting. You might not be aware, but not every state permits its overseas voters to vote down ballot. Sometimes they can only vote in federal elections. It's a very complex issue. If you want, I can send you the list, but those of us who can vote down ballot do. I head up the comms team in France, so I've got the social media team and the media team. And before the 2020 election, we had a meeting like this with a well-known data scientist who I won't name because I don't want to trigger you, who talked about the best way to motivate people is with positive news and not negative news. Yeah. And so for the last year, I've been trying to balance this, do this balancing act between that and your approach and StrikePAC's approach, which is to say, we need to scare the shit out of people to get them up out of their chairs and get them to vote. So that's the balance I'm trying to seek. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, that's the guillotine that lays over my head every day, right? Because at the end of the day, that's exactly what's going to get 99% of all the funding. We are going to try to cure racism and build class identities across race, and we're going to positive this, and we're going to, I mean, I invented Democrats Deliver, gave it to Jamie Harrison for free, and they've run with it, and it's going to be everywhere. But it ain't enough, folks. Okay, and if the maker is telling you that, then hopefully, like, it means something, right? So those things all need to get done. Like, there would never be a system in which we would not want candidates out there. We don't want candidates telling people they're fiscal conservatives. We don't want candidates talking about us, talking about AOC, talking about defund the police. We want to teach our system how to go on the offense, right? How to pivot and attack, and to be good brand ambassadors, because there's absolutely no reason why we want to reinforce this false perception that the Republican Party is better for the economy, given that we're not in 1992 anymore. We are now in 2022 and have 40 years of failed Reaganomics to just eviscerate them with, right? So we want people to be strong advocates for the brand, whether they're progressives, liberals, moderates, whatever they consider themselves to be. There should be a moxie to them. They should be proud to be Democrats, and they should be making a case as to why other people should be proud to be Democrats, not reinforcing the Republicans' anti-democratic branding efforts. So that's really important. But at the end of the day, the system that I'm describing and trying to deploy is currently not going to be deployed in very many places. I'm working hard to fix that every single day, but it's a reality. So, like, every person that I can convince to not buy into feel good confirmation bias, which is what that research is, because think about it, their argument makes no sense. I mean, I just read a report where one of them was arguing, that they go through all the GOP's like, psychological torture on independent voters and how effective it is. And then in the same report say, and we tested negative and positive, messaging, and these voters don't respond to negative messaging. Well, that's interesting, because they seem to respond to it just fine when it comes from the other party, right? And the Republican Party seems to win a lot of elections, even though it's never sitting there hand-wringing about how to get us to vote for it. Okay, so those are two, like, what I call macro, like, checks, right? Like, okay, does this make sense at a macro level? Like, why would independent voters respond to negative frames and motive advertising and stakes framing only from the right? Clearly, we've never tested it on the left, right? Because they will respond, and that testing is in progress now. But we really want people to understand, if somebody is tuned out, it's because they don't care about policy like you do. They don't really even know who Chuck Schumer and Sheldon White, and they sure as hell aren't watching confirmation hearings or anything like that. And you have to give them a reason to care. And to me, hey, the government gave you COVID relief checks or shots in arms or bridges and infrastructure or rural broadband, all great branding work that needs to get done and was not getting done previously. So I'm glad it's happening. Not going to move that 9-point differential enthusiasm. Just not going to happen.
Thank you very much. Sarah Malloy.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for being with us today, Rachel. I've followed you for a while and your work is really fascinating. I wanted to ask, in reference to messaging, is there anything that the Democrats are doing right now that appears to work, particularly with low propensity voters? And conversely, what messages are we relying on that we need to stop using?
Yeah. So there's a lot going on in that question. I will tell you, like, the testing environment's tough, right? Because there's no way to really test the effectiveness of ads on the people. There's a few platforms that we use that do that. It's panel, it's opt-in. The people who are answering these questions are the kinds of people that want to watch a political ad and then do like basically a focus group upon it. So, at the end of the day, like where a strategy gets tested is in the field, okay? And in 2021, there were two arguments about Virginia, the one that I made and the one that the status quo ran with, right? And I argued, look, the only way to win Virginia in 2021 is a change election, okay? You're also dealing with 8 years of Democratic regime in the state of Virginia, but it's a change election by its very definition. And so therefore you must disqualify change, right? Just make the change seem unappetizing and therefore people won't buy it, right? So, you know, we did not do that. And it's so frustrating to me, you know, especially because I don't know if people understand this, but I actually am expatted myself off the East Coast and back home to Oregon. And I hope that I don't have to go somewhere else beyond here in, you know, the next year or two, but who knows, I may have to if we fail to do what we're setting out here to do. You know, when we think about the, you know, the tone and the temperament of 21, we know that they made changes on targeting, they invested way more money in field, they did this, they did that, and we already know 100% that those tweaks were insufficient, okay? Because they lost Virginia. If they lose in Virginia, the best educated, diverse, swing state electorate in the nation, followed only by Colorado, and they almost lost New Jersey. Like, that means that your system is not competitive against the Republican systems in this environment. And in 2018, I said, well, Democrats won despite their messaging, despite the strategies they ran, despite the voter targeting models that they use, because they didn't need that shit. And then once Trump is gone, then strategy will become everything. And right now we are pursuing en masse the wrong strategy. And therefore it's kind of falling to groups like yourselves, people like you, individuals who maybe read history books when you were a kid or learned about the Constitutional Convention, the Revolution, and Jefferson, and even these men all commit treason to defy the King of Britain. You thought, I'd be marching in the streets of Selma. Well, here's your moment, guys. This is a Selma moment. If you've ever thought you'd be a freedom fucking rider, get on the bus, because the bus needs you. It needs every passenger it can get. And, you know, this is your historic moment to shine.
Thank you. And I'm very happy that we've got a question here from Martha McDevitt-Pugh, who's one of Democrats Abroad representatives on the DNC. Martha, please fire away.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for being with us today, Rachel. I have also followed your work, maybe in part because it gave me some hope in 2019 and 2020 that we were going to win. And of course, it's a little bit the other way around right now. So I'm just wondering, you know, there are possibly some pretty blockbuster upcoming Supreme Court decisions. And I'm wondering, you know, what you think about those as a potential to, let's say, wake up and engage and scare Democrats and get them to vote.
I don't think it'll be useful at all, to be honest with you. Think of all the things that have happened that are monumentous in that regard, okay? So like the reason is that we have these monumental advantages, but there's nobody to swing at the ball. The ball's getting pitched by circumstance or the system, or the courts, or whatever it might be, the select committee. There has to be somebody to wedge it, right? To take it and politicize it and hammer the electorate with it. So like, you know, I was doing an interview with a magazine or a newspaper that was just asking the same topic that you're mentioning, Martha, like how important is it that they actually repeal Roe versus scale it back or whatever, right? And I was like, listen, here's the thing, is that they can or cannot, if you don't take that into, if you don't turn that into an offensive campaign and just hammer it like they did the CRT, then there's not going to be you're not going to get this natural spark. In other words, you have to make the bonfire. You get a spark, but you have to build the fire pit, right? And so we really need that to happen. And like I've often said, like I spend zero time hand-wringing about AOC, the squad, this person, that person, defund the police. Doesn't bother me. Look at them, man. I can't even decide which thing I would want to like sniper strategy on, because there's so much to pick from. But obviously a tax raise for everyone, defunding Medicare, gutting Social Security, and ending liberal democracy, to me, are things that we should be wedging. So, you know, in other words, we don't need any more cake to bake. We need to use the ingredients that we have and deploy them in a way that terrifies casual voters and makes conversion voters fear their life under Republican control.
Okay, and thank you for that, Rachel. I don't see any other questions just now, so I've got a sort of a two-parter myself. The first one is, you know, we are seeing incredibly delayed justice for the people who perpetrated January the 6th. Now, you know, I've been a citizen since 2001, but to me, Biden needs to get a few wins under his belt, and one of them seems to me that we need to get some people charged with an attempted coup d'etat. How do you feel? Would that make a difference or have an effect? That's my first question. Then my second question is more general, in that with Democrats abroad, you know, we worked with our organization around the world. I mean, we had nearly 20,000 volunteers engaged in 2020. We ran digital advertising campaigns in 40 countries. We had, I think the ads that we ran were viewed 52.5 million times around the world. We know that in spite of the low percentages, we do know that Americans from overseas voted in unprecedented numbers, really. And we did all, plus the other thing that we did, which was really fantastic, was we did phone banking in dozens and dozens of countries, using the principle that you described earlier, where we were asking friends of friends of friends, you know, can you get your neighbors and whatever to get out there and vote? Now, we'd love to do more of that, and we did it on a shoestring budget. We don't get any funding from anyone. We get funding from our volunteers. And, you know, so the second part of my question really is, what do you think we could do to try and signal to a few other people, hey, give us some cash, for God's sake, because you know, we're reading all the time about billions of dollars being spent on elections. Well, we're going after a pool of 6.5 million people. And if we had $500,000 to do it, we would deliver votes in every state. So if you have any ideas on that, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I mean, just to go backwards in order, you know, I mean, if I can find money for you guys, I intend to bring you some. Hey, because you know, yeah, like I said, I mean, this should have been a year ago. The DNC, you know, this should have, I mean, yeah. But yeah, so I will be keen to bring you guys some money, and you know, I'm a little constrained right now, but hopefully we'll be able to help in that regard. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just such a critical resource to leave sitting there and not doing anything. And I'm glad to hear of the extent of your current infrastructure, because it means that that is amenable very quickly with some cash infusion to scale up to be a little bit more aggressive, especially in terms of diversifying the state pool from which these ballots are getting returned, which I think is critical for us, right? So in that regard, all makes sense and sounds good. And gosh, you know, yeah, it's frustrating, and you're not the only people that are sitting there with some very valuable resource that has not either not been spoken with or under invested in with you know, the part of the party that could make a difference. In terms of the rule of law, if Merrick Garland and the Justice Department don't bring forth indictments under the, you know, idea that is improper to prosecute a president, it's not relying under a lawsuit about a blowjob. Okay, we're talking about the most fundamental elements of democracy. So I think it would be the end of America, frankly, if he does not pursue criminal prosecutions. And I just think that's so unlikely that there's not going to be a charging, you know, especially given that the select committee has kind of performed the duty of the grand jury, right? And it has done something really unprecedented and said, look, this guy, the president himself is involved in the criminal conspiracy. It's as good of a referral for prosecution as you could possibly get. And I think it is cover, you know, for getting through the political elements of the stuff so DOJ can be more sanitized. So I have faith that these indictments are coming, and the wheels of justice do move slowly. And I know Merrick Garland is aware of the possibility that the law is as it is today and may not be the same law in 2024. I mean, certainly we could see indictments, convictions, and then see Ron DeSantis come into the presidency and just say, you know what, I'm pardoning all these people and I'm also suspending the law. I'm suspending the First Amendment. I mean, they can do whatever they want. That's how society fails, is when law becomes no longer applicable. And Merrick Garland clearly signaled in his last public statement that he understands that as a potential problem here in this particular circumstance. So I do expect that we're going to see Republicans start talking about the grace period that's supposed to exist before a general election. And I hope that, you know, the Justice Department understands that that's a political charge that they're going to preemptively make and goes forward with this charging, because I just don't know. There are so many parts of that, especially the left-leaning independent part of the coalition. When you prod down what is disappointed them, it's not big build back better, dude. It's justice, right? It's full-throated defense of democracy and the rule of law, which can only be weeded out in this case by the Department of Justice. So I think that it will have a galvanizing effect, but it won't be enough. It will have to be, again, anything like a Roe repeal has to be farmed in terms of messaging and not wonky brain messaging, emotive gut messaging.
Okay, I should just mention that Jamie Raskin, who's been involved with Democrats abroad himself back in the day in Paris, you know, we're very glad that he is one of the people leading the charge for justice. So thank you for that answer. Rocky, you have a question? Someone called Rocky. Please fire away.
Yes, I wrote my candidates and asked them to mention overseas voters in their own campaign speeches. I got no response by email from their team and didn't see anything in print that they did mention overseas voters. Perhaps they're afraid to, I don't know.
No, you know what? Honestly, after a year of trying to okay, when I started to make StrikePAC, I thought, okay, I mean, it was literally the election night that I decided to do something. I had to do something because it is all preventable. Like the things that are happening to us don't have to happen. We don't have to walk the plank. We could change our outcome. And on the election night, I could tell very early that we were going to hit what we needed to hit in 3 swings in the Midwest, and thus Joe Biden would, by necessity, be the president. But it was also very obvious to me that we were underperforming dramatically down ballot in the House and the Senate. And, you know, to lose 14 seats in a cycle where you're running against an incumbent president who is literally killing thousands of people every day from gross ineptness. And, you know, the Republican Party was at that time holding hostage the HEROES Act. Okay, so how can you not have made a compelling case all the way from the top to the bottom of the ticket? You know, to voters, the Republican Party writ large is irresponsible and should not be in control of your lives. So at that night, I was like, okay, the Democrats have a messaging problem. They certainly have a targeting problem. You know, it's a strategic problem, but it is so much worse than what I knew a year ago, because at the end of the day, our preference for decentralization in terms of how we've designed our institutions is our greatest systemic weakness right now. There is no general, there is no war cabinet, there is no war room. There is just 4 institutions that do specific things and whose leaders are in charge of large bureaucracies and are basically administrators, right? But there is no war making or war room function in our infrastructure. And that means that when you send an email, there's no one to call, right? There's no one to tell, hey, we're going to lose 30 seats in the House, and the only way that we can change it is by changing the generic ballot and the enthusiasm gap. There's nobody to call. And why I think that's really problematic, guys, is that, you know, having spent now about a year digging really deeply into military history and other, you know, stuff like that, there's nobody's ever won a battle, let alone a war, with no command structure.
Thank you. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry I missed your question earlier, so you're up. And then I'd like Katie Solon just to come on as well. She's the former chair of Democrats Abroad and a DNC rep. So anyway, Philadelphia, please speak. Are you there, PP? Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Well, the question was if gas prices are going to be a problem for Democrats in November.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it just depends on what's happening in Ukraine with gas prices, right? But like, yes, I mean, yes, it's very difficult for Democrats to, when gas is high, it doesn't hurt Republicans. When gas is high, it hurts Democrats. Why? Is it, well, what causes that? Well, it's the messaging, right? So Republicans are going to wedge whatever they think is the most effective thing. As soon as the first time I heard the word inflation last fall, I was like, oh, they're going to Jimmy Carter him, right? And it doesn't matter if it goes, this is what I'm trying to stress to people. If we want to change the generic ballot and the enthusiasm gap, the only way to do that is through intentional work and strategy. Because if inflation goes up or down, if gas prices are higher or lower, if Roe gets gutted or repealed, at the end of the day, those political events only happen in a vacuum unless we expand the scope of their effect out to average, regular people, these marginal people that we either have to convince to vote again for Democrats or vote at all. And, the way to do that is to make them to tap into their fear and their threat. So like inflation can't just be, well, no, inflation's really not that bad. That's not going to work. We have to instead muddy the water and attack them on inflation so that voters are left thinking, well, I know inflation's high. Is it Biden's fault or is it the Republicans' fault? That is the only way to neutralize one of their attacks, and even then neutralizing it with a counter offense, right? So that's, to me, the GOP, and to sum it up this way, the GOP makes their circumstance, right? They're facing a 60% Hillary Clinton. Fine, we'll turn Benghazi into a wedge issue. We'll abuse control of the House. We'll have 9 select committees. We will turn her into a villain. And it worked, right? And it's a strategy they deployed a year before she declared her candidacy. So my argument is we all have it within us to make our fortunes too, to make voters care about the shit that we want them to care about. But it's all going to require a lot of turning the Titanic that we're currently operating now.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure Katie's still on. Katie, are you there? No, but Katie Solon had mentioned that we had 600,000 calls that were made through phone banking around the world last time, and hopefully we'll be doing more this time around because it's a critical part of what Democrats Abroad do.
Yeah, and it would be great to see you guys develop a program for this peer-to-peer option so that instead of calling strangers on the phone, I mean, not that you won't do that, you should do that, it needs to be done, but think about that same work going out to someone's personal circle and them calling, their son, their daughter, their mother, their father, their aunt, their uncle that they know is not engaged in politics but doesn't want to live in a fascist theocracy, right? And getting, calling them and personally appealing, do me a favor, go and vote, right? Even if you don't think it's important to me. Will you do this for my birthday? Just do it. Getting people to vote, that personal connection, I think would be very useful.
Well, one of the things that's very nice about doing phone banking overseas is that generally when you call people in Spain, for example, where I am, they're quite happy to hear from you. So because everyone's living in a new environment. So it's not like phone banking in the US, not at all, which I've done. It's a whole different way of connecting with people.
Oh, that's really cool. That is awesome. So, I want to take a point of privilege and ask my own question. Can I do that?
Please.
I'm curious as to which country should be my #1 bug out country.
Well, I like Spain myself.
Spain, obviously.
Definitely France.
France is pretty good too.
I can't go without Hamilton though, you know, my dog.
Oh, well, you can, that means you can't go to the UK.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Europe is paradise for animals, except for the UK. Right.
Right.
France, they go to the restaurants, they can go anywhere.
I know, you know, I don't want to bug out, but if I do, I want to bug out early and where I have choice.
Well, we've gone past the hour, and you know, you've been wonderful, Rachel. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question before we close off, or any point that you'd like to make? Please either wave or do star in the chat. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. Oh, hang on, there is a hand up. Evelyn, please fire away.
Yes, hi. I just wanted, I'm the lead of the Georgia State team, and I put our contact details in the chat. We have a Facebook group if you'd like to keep in contact with us there, or otherwise evelynriera@yahoo.de. But that's not why I'm on. I wanted to point out that we're very short of phone banking people. We have very few volunteers. The Ohio State team phone banking could not be completed because we didn't have enough volunteers. Pennsylvania and Georgia is coming up, and I think we have something like 4 people, which is also not too great. So please reach out and yeah, ask people if they want to phone bank. So thank you very much, and thank you, Rachel, for speaking to us this evening.
And thank you, each and every one of you that do activities like that. You are the most important parts of the system, and I know no one ever tells you that, but I know.
Well, thank you, Rachel. We appreciate your time again. Annie?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been an honor.
I'm happy to come back and help as much as I can.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
bye-bye.
Good night,
Bye,
good night
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.